The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a pale glow over room 207. Students shuffled into their seats, settling into clusters that mirrored the unspoken divisions of race and familiarity. Posters about inclusion hung lopsided on the walls, their peeling corners betraying the hollow promise they represented. Amara sat at her desk, her fingers tracing the edges of her worn textbook. Scribbled notes filled every margin. Formulas, diagrams, reminders to herself not to give up. She had stayed up late again last night, hunched over her desk under the dim light of an old lamp. Her dream was clear. She wanted to be an engineer, someone who could solve real-world problems with creativity and precision. But no matter how hard she worked, there was always something else weighing her down, sideways glances when she answered questions correctly, dismissive remarks from classmates, the subtle doubt in teachers' voices when they praised her work. "Ms. Carter," Amara said hesitantly during class discussion, raising her hand just high enough for it to be noticed. "I think we can improve efficiency by adjusting the angle of the solar panels." Ms. Carter paused. Her lips pursed as she glanced around the room before finally looking at Amara. "Interesting idea," she said coolly, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But are you sure you fully understand the concept? Maybe someone else can explain it more clearly." A few students exchanged knowing looks while others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Amara bit her lip but nodded, forcing a polite smile. It wasn't the first time Ms. Carter had questioned her contributions this way, and it wouldn't be the last. Later that day, Principal Hayes stood quietly in the corner of the faculty lounge, observing without speaking. He watched as Ms. Carter addressed a group of colleagues, her voice dripping with condescension when she spoke to one of the younger black teachers. "These new initiatives sound nice in theory," she said with a shrug. "But let's face it, they're impractical." Principal Hayes clenched his jaw slightly, remembering all too well what it felt like to have his abilities questioned because of the color of his skin. His own journey through school and into leadership had been marked by similar struggles, and he carried those memories with him like scars. They fueled his resolve to create change, even if progress came slowly. When Amara submitted her final project, a detailed blueprint for a sustainable energy solution designed to help underserved communities, it earned glowing feedback from guest judges at a local science fair. One judge called it groundbreaking, and another praised its potential to inspire innovation. Amara beamed with pride, imagining how far this recognition might take her. But then came the grade. A red F scrawled across the top of her paper, accompanied by Ms. Carter's curt comment, "Lacks effort." Amara stared at the page, her heart pounding. "This isn't right," she whispered to herself, shaking her head. When she showed Jamal, her best friend, he frowned deeply. "She can't do this, Era. You know it's not true." Word spread quickly among their peers, sparking outrage. At home, Amara tried to hold back tears as she showed her mother the graded project. "Mom, I don't get it," she said, her voice trembling. "I worked so hard." And she just dismissed it like it didn't matter. Her mother pulled her close, stroking her hair. "Baby, I know it hurts, but don't let this define you. You've got talent and no one can take that away. What matters now is what you do next." "I want to fight back," Amara said after a long pause, wiping her eyes. "But I don't even know where to start." Jamal leaned forward earnestly the next morning as they sat together in the cafeteria. "We gather evidence," he suggested. "Talk to other students who've had issues with her. Show everyone what's really going on." Amara nodded slowly, determination flickering in her chest like a tiny flame. For the first time since receiving the grade, she felt a spark of hope, not just for herself, but for everyone else who'd been silenced or overlooked. That evening, Amara began drafting emails to former classmates, asking them to share their experiences with Ms. Carter. Each response added fuel to the fire inside her. One message read, "She told me my essay was too ambitious for someone like me." Another, "She always gave white kids extra credit opportunities, but never offered them to us." As the days passed, Amara's frustration transformed into focus. She realized this wasn't just about her. It was about challenging the systemic biases that had gone unchecked for far too long. The tension built steadily within her, a quiet storm waiting to break. Amara sat alone in her room, the dim glow of her desk lamp casting shadows across the walls. She stared at the graded project on her desk, the red F glaring back at her like an accusation. The whispers crept into her mind. Again, affirmative action. She only got it because each word felt like a weight pressing down on her chest. She remembered being 8 years old, standing in front of her class to read a poem she'd written. Her teacher had smiled but added, "You speak so articulately for someone your age." Back then, she hadn't understood why the compliment felt wrong. Now she did. It wasn't praise, it was doubt disguised as kindness. Another memory surfaced. Group projects where her ideas were ignored until a white classmate repeated them. She'd learned to shrink herself, to stay quiet and avoid drawing attention. But this time, staying quiet wasn't an option. This time, silence would mean letting Miss Carter win. The next morning, Amara found Jamal waiting for her by the school gates. His backpack slung over one shoulder, he gave her a knowing look. "You okay?" he asked softly. "I don't know," Amara admitted, clutching her bag tighter. "I keep thinking about everything people have said to me over the years. Like maybe they're right, that I'm not good enough." Jamal shook his head firmly. "Don't let her get inside your head. You're brilliant, Era, and you've worked harder than anyone else in that class." "I just feel so stuck," Amara said, her voice cracking. "Like no matter what I do, it'll never be enough." Jamal placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then we make sure it's not just about you. This isn't just your fight. It's everyone's. Let's figure out how to take her down." Over the next few days, Amara and Jamal reached out to other students who'd faced similar treatment from Ms. Carter. They met in the library after school, huddled around a table littered with notebooks and laptops. One student, Maria, spoke up first. "Last semester, she told me my essay was too ambitious. When I asked what that meant, she said I should stick to simpler topics." Another student, Elijah, chimed in. "She gave me extra homework every time I questioned something in class. Said I needed to prove I understood the material." As the stories piled up, Amara felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger that so many had suffered in silence, and relief that she wasn't alone. Together, they compiled documentation showing inconsistent grading patterns over several semesters. The evidence was undeniable, a pattern of bias targeting minority students. With their case solidified, Amara and Jamal decided to organize a peaceful protest outside the school. Flyers went up around campus, social media posts spread the message, and soon, dozens of students were rallying behind them. On the day of the protest, the air buzzed with energy as students held signs reading, "Fair grades. Not biases, and education is a right, not a privilege." Reporters arrived, cameras flashing as Amara addressed the crowd. "We're here today because one teacher's prejudice isn't just affecting one student. It's hurting all of us," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves twisting in her stomach. "Ms. Carter thinks our voices don't matter, but we're proving her wrong." While the protest drew widespread support, it also sparked backlash. Some parents accused Amara of stirring up trouble, while others defended Ms. Carter as a strict but fair educator. Even a few teachers criticized the protest, calling it disruptive and politically motivated. In private, Ms. Carter doubled down on her stance. During a tense meeting with Principal Hayes, she insisted that Amara's project lacked originality. "It's clear she copied parts of it online," Ms. Carter claimed, though she couldn't provide any proof. Her tone turned defensive when pressed further. "These kids think they can demand special treatment because of their background. It's ridiculous." Principal Hayes listened silently, his jaw tightening. He knew exactly what Ms. Carter was doing, shifting blame, denying responsibility, clinging to her biases. Later that evening, as he reviewed the evidence Amara and Jamal had gathered, memories of his own struggles flooded back. He thought about the times he'd been overlooked for promotions, told he didn't fit the image of leadership. Those experiences had shaped him, pushing him to advocate for fairness wherever he could. At a heated parent-teacher conference, Amara's mother confronted Ms. Carter directly. How dare you fail my daughter for something she poured her heart into? She demanded, her voice trembling with emotion. Do you even realize the impact your actions have on these kids? On my child? Miss Carter stammered, trying to deflect. I was simply following the grading rubric. Stop lying. Another parent interrupted, standing up in solidarity with Amara's mother. We see what you're doing, and it's unacceptable. The confrontation left witnesses uneasy, some nodding in agreement while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For the first time, Miss Carter looked uncertain, her mask slipping under the weight of collective outrage. Back at the protest, Amara stood before the crowd, her heart pounding as she prepared to speak. This isn't just about grades or one teacher's bias, she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. It's about standing up for ourselves and saying we deserve better. We deserve to be seen, heard, and valued. So today we're taking a stand, not just for me, but for every student who's ever been made to feel small. Her words ignited a fire in the crowd. Cheers erupted, fists raised in solidarity. Students hugged each other, tears streaming down their faces as they realized the power of unity. But the backlash came swiftly. Some classmates whispered behind Amara's back, questioning her motives. A teacher even pulled her aside after class, warning her not to rock the boat too much. Doubt crept in again, making her wonder if the fight was worth the cost. That night, Jamal called her. Hey, tough day, huh? Yeah, Amara sighed, sinking onto her bed. Sometimes I wonder if anything will really change. It will, Jamal said firmly. Look at what you've already done. People are talking about this now. Teachers are starting to question their own biases. That's progress, Era. Real progress. His words gave her strength. She thought about the emails she'd received from younger students thanking her for speaking out. About the parents who'd approached her mother, sharing stories of their own battles with discrimination. Small victories, yes, but victories nonetheless. By the end of the week, conversations about systemic racism had begun rippling through the school community. Teachers started incorporating discussions about bias into their lessons. A committee was formed to review grading policies and ensure fairness. While resistance remained, cracks were forming in the walls of prejudice, one step closer to breaking them down entirely. Amara smiled faintly as she packed up her books after school. The road ahead was long, but for the first time, she felt hopeful. Change was possible, and she was ready to keep fighting for it. The room buzzed with tension as the school board convened for the public hearing. Parents, students, and faculty filled every seat, their faces reflecting a mix of anger, hope, and unease. Supporters of Amara sat on one side, clutching signs and exchanging quiet words of encouragement. On the other side, defenders of Miss Carter whispered among themselves, some crossing their arms defiantly. The air was thick with anticipation, each person holding their breath as the proceedings began. Amara rose from her seat when called to the stand. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied herself, drawing strength from the sea of familiar faces watching her. My name is Amara Johnson, she started, her voice clear despite the weight pressing down on her chest. For years, I've been told I don't belong, not because of anything I've done, but because of who I am. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. I've been called too articulate and accused of getting opportunities only because of my race. When Miss Carter gave me an F on a project I poured my heart into, it wasn't just about me. It was another example of how bias works, how it tells us we're not good enough no matter how hard we try. Her voice grew stronger as she shifted focus. This isn't just about one teacher or one student. It's about a system that lets prejudice go unchecked. Bias doesn't just hurt individuals. It harms entire communities by telling them they don't matter. But today, we're saying that has to change. The room fell silent as Principal Hayes stepped forward next. He adjusted his glasses, taking a deep breath before speaking. I've spent my life working in education because I believe it can be a force for good, he began, his tone measured yet passionate. But I've also seen firsthand how biases destroy potential. I grew up being told I wasn't leadership material, because of the color of my skin. Those words stayed with me, shaping how I saw myself and how others saw me. He held up a folder filled with evidence gathered by Amara and Jamal. These documents show a pattern of discrimination targeting minority students. And if we ignore this, we're complicit in perpetuating harm. Education should lift people up, not hold them back. Miss Carter stood abruptly, her face flushed as she attempted to defend herself. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, pointing at Amara. Her project lacked originality. She clearly copied parts of it online. Her voice wavered as murmurs rippled through the crowd. "And what about the protest?" she continued, her tone growing desperate. "It's all politically motivated. A way to stir up drama where none exists." Principal Hayes fixed her with a steady gaze. "Ms. Carter," he said firmly, "education should be a ladder, not a gate. And you've been holding the rungs closed." The room went still. His metaphor hung in the air, exposing the truth behind her actions. Miss Carter opened her mouth to respond but found no words. She sank back into her chair, visibly shaken, as whispers spread among the audience. After hours of testimony, the school board deliberated briefly before announcing their decision. "We find sufficient evidence of discriminatory practices," the chair declared, addressing the packed room. "Effective immediately, Ms. Carter will be removed from her position. Furthermore, mandatory bias training will be implemented for all staff members." A wave of relief washed over Amara, though the victory felt bittersweet. As the room erupted into applause, she glanced at Jamal, who gave her a thumbs up. Her mother reached out to squeeze her hand, tears streaming down her face. Later that evening, Amara received an email confirming her failing grade had been overturned. Not only that, but her project was officially recognized for its brilliance and entered into a national competition. Within days, it earned widespread acclaim, further validating her talent and resilience. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel proud, not just of the recognition, but of the courage it took to fight for justice. That night, Amara sat alone in her room, staring at the glowing screen of her laptop. She thought about everything that had led her here. The sleepless nights, the doubts, the moments when giving up seemed easier than pushing forward. Yet, even after winning this battle, she knew the war against systemic racism was far from over. Still, she felt a spark of determination ignite within her. "One step at a time," she whispered to herself, smiling faintly. "If I can inspire even one person to speak out, then it's worth it." The next morning, Amara arrived at school to find students and teachers rallying around her. Some offered hugs, while others simply smiled warmly or gave small nods of support. A group of younger students approached her shyly, asking how they could help make the school more inclusive. "I'm just one person," Amara told them gently, "but together, we can create real change." As the days passed, small acts of solidarity began transforming the school environment. Teachers started incorporating discussions about bias into their lessons. Students formed clubs dedicated to promoting equity and inclusion. While resistance lingered in some corners, the momentum toward progress was undeniable. Amara walked through the halls one afternoon, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would undoubtedly have challenges, but she was ready to face them head-on. Injustice might be deeply rooted, but so too was resilience. And as long as there were voices willing to challenge prejudice, hope would continue rising from the ashes. Amara sat on the edge of her bed, staring out the window as the first light of dawn painted the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of birdsong outside. Her mind wandered back over everything that had happened: the protests, the hearings, the backlash, and finally the victory. It wasn't perfect. One win didn't erase systemic racism or undo years of prejudice. But it proved something important: change was possible. She thought about Ms. Carter's dismissal, the school board's decision, and the recognition her project had received. Each moment felt like a step forward, not just for her, but for everyone who'd been told they weren't good enough. For the first time in a long while, Amara felt confident, not just in her abilities, but in her voice. She realized she could use this moment to help others facing similar struggles. Later that week, Amara found herself sitting across from 3 younger students in the library. They looked nervous, their hands fidgeting with pencils and notebooks. "You don't have to be afraid to speak up," Amara said gently, leaning forward to meet their eyes. "I know how hard it is to feel like no one listens, but your voice matters." One of them, a shy 7th grader named Mia, hesitated before speaking. "What if they say I'm wrong? Or that I'm making things up?" Amara smiled softly. "They might try to make you doubt yourself. But remember why you're doing this: for fairness, for respect. And you're not alone. We've got each other's backs." Her words seemed to give the students a little more confidence. As they left, thanking her quietly, Amara felt a warmth spread through her chest. If she could inspire even one person to stand up against injustice, then all of this would be worth it. The protest had sparked something bigger than anyone expected. Across the district, schools began implementing new policies aimed at supporting marginalized students. Diversity workshops became mandatory for teachers, and bias training sessions were introduced for staff members. Resources once reserved for select groups were now distributed more equitably, giving underrepresented students access to opportunities they'd long been denied. In classrooms, teachers started making small but meaningful changes. Lesson plans included stories from diverse perspectives, and grading. Practices were reviewed to ensure fairness. Students noticed the difference. Projects that once went unnoticed were celebrated, and voices that had been silenced were finally heard. Ms. Carter retired quietly shortly after the hearing. Few people attended her farewell gathering, and those who did exchanged awkward glances, unsure of what to say. Haunted by the exposure of her prejudices, she spent her final days avoiding eye contact in the hallways. While justice had prevailed, the story acknowledged that unlearning bias was a lifelong process. Accountability was only the first step toward real growth. On the evening of the National Science Fair Awards ceremony, Amara stood backstage, adjusting the hem of her dress and taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. Surrounded by proud friends and family, she accepted the trophy with trembling hands. As she looked out at the audience, she saw faces of every color, background, and age. Some clapped enthusiastically, while others wiped away tears. A sea of diversity stretched before her, hopeful, united, and ready to keep fighting for equality. In that moment, Amara felt a surge of gratitude for everyone who had stood by her side. When it was time for her closing remarks, Amara stepped up to the microphone. "This award isn't just mine," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion swelling inside her. "It belongs to everyone who refuses to stay silent when they see injustice. To everyone who dares to challenge stereotypes and demand fairness." She paused, scanning the crowd. Resilience isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up every time you do. Solidarity means lifting each other up, even when the road feels impossible. And collective action reminds us that we're stronger together than we ever could be apart. Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply with the audience. People nodded, some whispering agreements to their neighbors. Parents hugged their children tighter, and teachers exchanged knowing looks. Amara's message was clear. The fight wasn't over, but hope burned brighter than ever. Back at school, the seeds of change continued to grow. Students formed clubs dedicated to promoting equity, organizing events that brought the community closer together. Teachers collaborated on lesson plans designed to celebrate diversity, ensuring every student felt valued. Even small gestures, like sharing smiles or offering words of encouragement, became symbols of progress. During lunch one day, Amara watched as a group of students laughed together at a table, their differences blending seamlessly into friendship. Nearby, a teacher knelt beside a struggling student, patiently explaining a concept until understanding lit up their face. These moments, though seemingly small, signaled the beginning of a new chapter rooted in empathy and understanding. As the semester drew to a close, Amara stood on the soccer field after practice, gazing at the horizon. The sun dipped low, casting golden light across the grass. She thought about everything she'd learned, about resilience, about solidarity, about the power of authenticity. "I'm not done yet," she murmured to herself, a determined smile tugging at her lips. "There's still so much work to do." The final lines of the story echoed her resolve. Resilience, talent, and solidarity could transform not just individuals but entire communities. And as long as there were voices willing to challenge injustice, hope would continue to rise, lighting the way toward a brighter future.